Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Let's Talk Fortitude. And I am honored and blessed to have Chris Big Daddy Harrell with us to tell his story and his testimony. I got to tell everybody, first of all, just like about 99.8% of all the people I have on here, seems like anymore, I met through the Whites Ferry Road men's retreat, the very first one that they had. And there's one thing that always stood out about me, or stood out about you, Chris, was you and Fitz. Man, your all's voice. It's, you all are like me. You weren't born with a voice. You're born with a megaphone. And my wife will always tell me, John, you need to understand one thing, Kat, that when you think you're whispering, you're actually talking at everybody else's normal voice. So I've had to learn that. Chris, welcome, bro.
Hey, thanks for having me, John. And look, and no doubt that's one thing, my wife and I, when if we ever have a tiff, she always gets on me about my tone. And I'm like, baby, I'm just talking normal. Like, if I was upset, you'd really know it, and I don't really have I don't have an inside voice. It's just one big megaphone, unfortunately. So the truth is I finally turned that megaphone towards Jesus, which is, been the most important thing. So, but yeah, talking low and talking quiet isn't one of my things. That's for sure.
But man, when we learn how to use that voice for Christ and, for Jesus, it's, they can say what they want to. I want to be loud and clear to everybody about my belief and my faith. So, but yeah, so I ran into Chris was one of many that I ran into there at the WFR retreat, and then actually I listened to. Then you gave your testimony at one of the retreats before you were on Hallie's podcast, The Saltworks, right? Wasn't far in front of that. You had given your testimony, right?
No, and actually, I'd only given a mini testimony up to that point. I'd given a mini testimony a few times prior to being on Saltworks, but I actually just gave my full testimony at the Northern Row retreat about a month and a half ago.
Yeah, that's what I was telling you. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yep. So,
but Hallie and Andrew, I'm sitting here looking at my schedule. Hallie and Andrew are coming on Friday.
That's awesome. Look, Hallie and Andrew are unbelievable, and especially what they're doing with Hallie's podcast. I mean, they're touching many lives too, and they're two of my favorite people. So especially at such a young age, they're a little bit younger than me, but man, they portray Jesus in every avenue they have, and not just through their lives, but through their families' lives. So they're awesome people, no doubt.
Cool. I tell you what, tell us about Chris Harrell, man. Are you a native to Louisiana? Are you a transplant like I am here in Florida? Well, I'm actually born and raised West Virginia, and I've right out of high school in the military, so I've been transplanted all over the place. So, tell us a little bit about who you are.
So, Christopher Harrell, everybody calls me Big Daddy. Been that way. Either been Biggs, Big Daddy, Big Dad for years now. Grew up right here in North Louisiana. I've moved around a little bit, but I've been back here since I was probably 8 or 10 years old. I forget the exact age. Born in Natchez, Mississippi, moved down to Denham Springs, moved over to Atlanta, and then finally moved back to be here with family. Married to a beautiful wife, Erin. I've got an older daughter, Madison, who's got our grandbaby, Hanson Kate. And then me and my sidekick is Gavin. That's my son. He's 14. Unfortunately, looks like me, acts like me, especially at that age. So just a great kid. Man, I'm lucky with two awesome kids. And my son-in-law, Zane Corbel, who coaches here in Northeast Louisiana. Again, blessed with a great son-in-law too. I mean, we just got we're definitely lucky with our family. We've got I've got a great family. Over the last 2.5 years, we always believe, we're in and out of church, but over the last 2.5 years, we've really started diving into our faith a lot more, each one of us on different journeys. Man, I got to watch my son give his testimony. I hadn't even given my testimony yet. And my son gave his testimony in front of about 50 to 70 junior high kids, and it was amazing. He's got an unbelievable story that's kind of part of my story and part of what turned me even deeper to Jesus. So it's been awesome to see, but I'm definitely blessed with an awesome family. Graduated from the University of Louisiana at Monroe in 2004. Been in the restaurant business most of my life in one way or the other. I worked at a local restaurant here named Waterfront Grill for 6 years through college. Opened up a Raising Cane's. A lot of people wouldn't have known that in 2004, but Raising Cane's is now ventured out. It's all across the country. I was the first store to actually leave South Louisiana. I opened my store in West Monroe, Louisiana, and then opened a second location in Monroe, Louisiana. And just been in or around the restaurant business ever since. I'm currently a district sales manager for Cisco Foods. I've got 8 sales reps across North Louisiana and about 500 customers. So, but man, the most important thing about me, and I don't want anybody to lose sight, is I'm a man of Christ. And if I had a different identity for a long time, but man, my identity now is no matter what, it's in Christ. And that's the most important thing I want people to hear.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was listening to you. You guys talk about the how amazing it was for your son to give his testimony to all those kids. I mean, I'm with you. I don't know. Like you all talked about, you and Hallie and Andrew. I don't know that I could have done that at that age.
Man, I know I couldn't have, especially kind of the things he's been through, man. And I don't think he'd mind me saying it. He's talked about it. So my son went through some bullying through most of elementary school. In 6th grade, he was bullied to the point of he had tics every time the school year started, which is not uncommon this day and age for a kid to have some type of tic of something. And man, he had tics every time school would start. That nervousness would kick up, and he would have a tic of some sort. It may be a hand motion, it may be an eye tic. And the week of Thanksgiving, I want to say, and I'm going to tell you wrong, but the week of Thanksgiving of 2019 or 20, he developed his tics had gotten extremely bad. Up to that time, he had been telling us about some bullying that was going on, and he'd kind of experienced a lot of this leading up to that year after year. And me being the parent I am, I thought, hey, look, it's just boys being boys. You got to blow it off. Like, don't hang out with them, stay away from them. But what I didn't realize was how bad the bullying had got. And so the week of Thanksgiving, that Monday, leading up to the week of Thanksgiving, he had developed a pretty good hiccup tic. And he'd hiccup almost 2 weeks straight, like almost nonstop. And the problem was I never really realized what it was. And I would get on to him like, hey, you've got to stop. Like we're out to dinner, we're in church, whatever we may be. And he had a tic that he just could not stop. So luckily my wife is a Google doctor. She's actually pretty good at it. So she had kind of Googled some stuff and figured out, man, it's probably not good that he's been hiccuping this long. So we sent the videos to a friend of ours who worked for a neurologist here in town. And man, they were off that week. That's the crazy thing. They were closed the whole week of Thanksgiving. And the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, he said he wanted to see us immediately. And so I had to work. My wife took my son in to see him. They opened up the office just to see him. And I mean, he was with them for about 5 to 7 minutes before he looked at my wife and told us my son had Tourette Syndrome.
Wow.
Pretty life-altering for him. So it's just one of those things that you don't realize how bad the bullying had got. And I'll never forget, and I wasn't there, but he got in the car and he told my wife, he said, Mom, I don't have Tourette's. I don't even cuss, because the stigma is Tourette syndrome, you cuss out loud, and you do a lot of things that a lot of people don't realize what really Tourette's is, which can just be hand motions. It could be eye twitches. It could be a lot of different things. So man, that was a game changer for sure.
So how long ago was he diagnosed with that?
And I want to say 2020. I'm not looking at my notes right.
So it's been 2 or 3 years. It's not like it was this year. How's he doing now?
COVID had just started, and because we ended up getting, it had to be the second year of COVID because they had just went back to school. and you could actually do school either in person or at home at that time. And so he had chose to be in school. When he got diagnosed, we didn't send him back to school the rest of the year. He stayed virtual from that point through Christmas break. And then when they went back to school in January, he continued to stay virtual the whole time. And so he's in 8th grade, second year of 8th grade. So last year he was in 8th grade. The year before that, so it had to be 2019 when he was diagnosed. 2020 he set out. I'm sorry, 2020 he was diagnosed. 2021, his 7th grade year, we homeschooled him the whole time. My wife stayed home and homeschooled him just because he was still not completely okay with his Tourette's, kind of how to handle it. And so we kept him at home that whole year.
How's he doing now?
Man, unbelievable. And again, just, he's a lot of part of my story and kind of where I've went. But, in 2020, when he was diagnosed, when he went back that in January, we found a speech language pathologist that specializes in Tourette's. And so one of the things, he was going every Friday from 2 to 3 or 2 to 4 every Friday to work with her for almost 12 weeks. And what she teaches is breathing treatments, not treatments, but breathing techniques and techniques to understand when those tics are coming on. So he manages them. Most people don't even realize anymore that he has it. Like, I can see it, Aaron sees it, but I mean, he manages most of the tics very, very well. You would have to know and be able to look at him to see when he does them. So he manages it very well, no doubt.
So I'll send you a link tomorrow. There's a podcast that I have that's one of the very first ones. She's on the wall back here behind me.
Yeah.
Olivia Williams. She actually went to school with Chad. She is a beautiful girl. I mean, she's beautiful. She could go sit in the duck blind with those dudes down there. She hunts, she fishes. There's a huge story. However, what I didn't know about Olivia, she was bullied in high school. She was a cheerleader. And I don't want to misspeak, but I believe through that is what caused her to develop a severe anxiety issue. And she talks about how she used to eat her lunch in the bathroom to hide from people. So I'll send that to you. If you and Aaron want to sit down and kind of listen to it sometime. We go a little bit everywhere. It's a really good podcast. It's a little bit long, but I'll send it over to you if you want to listen to it. So at what point, Chris, did you give your life to the Lord?
So, great question. It's 2019. I was baptized. So kind of tell you a rundown of what happened. I met a pastor by the name of Frank Valenzano. To start at the very beginning, Frank and I went to high school together. I would say we were acquaintances at best. We knew each other. We had seen each other around school, but we didn't speak very often. And his wife actually graduated with us too, and both of us graduated in 1998 from West Monroe High School. 2019, we're on Facebook out of the blue. He adopts a son from Ethiopia, and you can only say it's a God thing at this point, but for some reason I decided to send him a Facebook message that just said, "Frank, saw you adopted a son, great looking family. Hope everything's been going well. Congratulations." And we ended up trading messages through Facebook, just kind of talking about the adoption and, how both of us are doing. But again, completely out of the blue, as I look back now, you can say it was 100% a God thing, that he set that up to send that message, because, what transpired from that point to where I'm at now is definitely a but God thing. So you look at it, it was probably 6 or 8 months later, I'm meeting with a friend of mine, Jeff Bennett, who I was doing business with at one of our restaurants. He was a restaurant general manager. He's got 4 locations, and he comes up to me at one of our meetings and was just like, "Hey man, do you know a guy by the name of Frank Valenzano?" And lo and behold, I was thinking, this is kind of strange. I said, yeah, I do. I actually just messaged him, 6 months ago about his family. And he says, well, can you give me a little information on him? And I told him, I said, man, really, I can tell you he was a great guy in high school, like for what I knew of him. I know he's a pastor now. And so he tells me that he was interviewing to be the pastor at First West Fairbanks, which is actually right outside my neighborhood. The church we were currently going to, which is North Monroe, where we're back at now, was in the process of building a new sanctuary. It was getting big, and my wife's not like a lot of people, kind of makes her nervous, makes her anxious. So it was kind of all happening at the same time. And Frank, about 2 days later, sends me a message back on Facebook about, hey, I'm coming up this Sunday. I'm going to be preaching in view of call at First West Fairbanks, and just invited my wife and I, if we wanted to come visit, he would love to have us. And so, we decided, hey, absolutely, we'll go try it out just to, see him, give him a familiar face in the crowd, even though at that point we weren't friends. We were definitely acquaintances. And so we went and absolutely loved it. One thing led to another. Frank ends up getting a job. We end up changing churches. Much smaller church. I mean, a big service there when Frank was there was probably 230, 250 people versus, at North Monroe, you're 1,800 to 2,500. So, but man, that chain of events led to an unbelievable friendship, but between Frank and I and his family, and just the first time I'd really been pastored. Somebody I could go to, somebody I could talk to, and somebody that asked me questions about my faith. And it was awesome. So, I'm definitely thankful for those. I call them now divine appointments. I tell everybody, man, anytime I tell my story, I used to believe in coincidences, and I don't believe in coincidences anymore. I believe that every situation and every appointment and every meeting is a divine appointment set up by God. And I can look back from where I'm at now and start at that very first message to say, man, look what God did to put these things in place to lead me to baptism, to lead me to going on a retreat, to lead me to completely changing who I am and leading our family to a much deeper relationship with Jesus.
So, when did you meet Aaron? How did you all?
Funny you ask. So as I'm telling you about these Facebook messages, it's really weird because, if you'll follow, and I don't know, you probably do, John, but I'm all over social media. I'm a social media guy. I always have been. Unfortunately, when social media first came out, I used it in all the wrong ways. Definitely. I mean, Facebook has these memories, and sometimes I look at these memories and I'm like, holy cow. One thing, I can't believe I posted that. Number two, I can't believe I talked like that. So as you walk through my testimony, social media is all over it. It's pretty crazy how much social media has been a part of my testimony. But then I realized, like, hey, God puts platforms together for you, so, you can glorify him. And I've definitely changed that platform and all my social medias to where I spend, if you're going to follow me on social media, you're going to see I glorify Jesus. It may be verses, it may be songs, it may be pastorals, it may be posting these podcasts. Like, if you're going to come there, you're going to see I'm going to glorify Jesus 99% of the time. So I met my wife on MySpace. MySpace isn't really even around anymore. Yeah. So,
yeah, I remember MySpace, man. Absolutely. I miss it a little bit.
Me too. Look, I was trying this weekend, Friday, I was trying to dig through MySpace because there's some pictures and stuff that I'd like to get. And a friend of mine and I were talking about it. And so I was digging through trying to download some of that stuff, but I couldn't get to them. So I was going through a pretty bad breakup. I'd been engaged for about a year and had been in a pretty bad breakup for 3 or 4 months. And I got a MySpace message that just said, hey, you're kind of cute. I think we know some of the same people. We ought to hang out. And, my mind, being a guy, being in that situation, was immediately in the gutter. Like, absolutely. Yeah. What I didn't know is what God was lining up. And so we ended up hanging out. And from that point, never really looked back. I mean, there was a few times early on, maybe the first month or two, that we may have looked back, or I may have looked back and just realized that man, God had set all that up for me. She had a daughter that was 5 at the time, 5 or 6 at the time. So, you know, what I tell people now is, man, God took one away and gave me 2 right in the time that I probably needed it most. So that's how I met her. I didn't just meet her; I met her daughter too. So it was, which is Maddie, which is, you know, and I tell everybody, look, at this point in time, she's just as much my daughter as anybody else's. I love her to death. She's my girl. And man, I'm blessed no matter what for what God put in front of me back then.
So when you guys, where was she in her walk with Christ, or where was she in her relationship when you gave your life to the Lord? Was she already there? Is that something?
Well, you know, it's hard to say where she was. I would say that
was she raised in church or something whenever, you know, when she was coming up, or were both?
Yeah, she was raised in church, definitely. But at the point that we met, I tell everybody we were both checkmark Christians.
I hear that. Yeah.
You know, we went to church. She went to church a little bit. I think I was going to church a little bit through with the other relationship, but I was never, I mean, I grew up around church, but was never in church. You know, I didn't know, I definitely didn't have a relationship with Jesus. I knew a few Bible scriptures. You know, everybody knows John 3:16. So I knew John 3:16. I did a lot of youth group stuff. And I think she was a lot of the same way. But, you know, when we started dating, we were definitely checkmark Christians. We would go every time we woke up and thought about it. You know, it may be once a month. It may be maybe a couple times a month. It may be once every 2 or 3 months. We would go just to get our check mark, let people know we were coming, just so, you know, I tell people just so they didn't think we were full-time heathens. So, but we definitely weren't living in the light. There was a lot of darkness around, you know, kind of what we were going through as a couple. But God was definitely there the entire time through all that. But he has turned us both, you know. It's funny, and we'll get into this talking about these men's and women's retreats. I went on a retreat 2.5 years ago that absolutely changed me. And I got off the retreat and did the worst thing. Like they tell you throughout the retreat, like, hey, remember your wife hasn't been on the retreat. So, you know, you got to kind of go home and kind of ease into this thing with her. And man, I went home and was like throwing the Bible at her. You know, and I didn't mean to, but, you know, just telling her she needed to go on a retreat and, hey, you need to do this and you need to do that and you need this. And, you know, for about 2 months I did that, and all it did was cause arguments and fights. And when I say fights, nothing serious, nothing more than most couples would probably do. And I finally realized, all right, I'm going to quit just talking about it, and I'm just going to show her a difference. And, you know, I started doing some Bible studies and started getting more involved with church, more involved with life group. And, you know, eventually she did decide to go on a retreat. She's went on a retreat. She's teamed on a couple of retreats. So just to see her walk and how she's followed up and how she's leaning into Jesus. And then again, you know, we said this earlier, you know, through that, my son gave his testimony. My son-in-law's given his life to Christ. My daughters, they're both more involved. So, you know, where we were then versus where we are now is totally different. No doubt about it. So the first 12 years, I would say at that point, we were checkmark Christians, just go and get our little check. Everybody know that we're not just absolutely crazy. But that was about where that relationship ended. It started on Sunday morning and ended at Sunday about 1.
So I'm gonna pull a JJ Sauce on me and you both. Anytime I talk to JJ, he'll say, "No, now in order to get where we need to be, we got to back up a little bit." Yeah, we got to start from the beginning. So one of the guys that I also have met through all this is by the name of Rooster Hamby.
Oh yeah,
and boy, he is something else. And according to what I have been told, he wasn't always the man he is now. like me and you both. I mean, we're both, changed people, that we're not who we used to be. Kind of back up a little bit and kind of go into that story about, we were in the Buck Commander Bible study that one morning, and you said, look, whenever I saw that Rooster Hamby was there, I'm like, this must be for real. So something's for real here.
Yeah. So great question. And I don't know how Rooster feels about me always saying this, but look, I had a different side through the end of high school and most of college where I got this fighting mentality and really enjoyed to fight, and look back on it now. And I mean, it definitely wasn't a good way to live, but I enjoyed it. And through that, I was always told there's this one guy that was in North Louisiana that you never wanted to mess with. No matter what you do, don't fight Rooster Hamby. And I'd seen him, but really didn't know who he was. And now he's one of my closest friends. Man, we don't go a day where we don't text or talk. But through all that, you hear this guy, and you hear his persona, and you hear just like, baddest man in Monroe. That's all I'd ever heard. He's the baddest man in Monroe. Like, you go in the opposite direction if you ever see him. Like, perfect. The funny thing is, the first time I truly saw him, I was walking into that men's retreat, into a men's retreat at North Monroe's first men's retreat I ever went on. And man, I see this guy, and he's hugging on people, and they told me, I was asking who they were, or maybe they introduced themselves. I don't remember exactly what happened, but I remember the name Rooster Hamby, and I was sitting in a pew as we were getting ready to start this retreat. And I remember thinking to myself, wait a minute, that's Rooster Hamby. And the thought came to me like, what is he doing here? What is the baddest man in Monroe doing at a Christian men's retreat? I went into this men's retreat business thinking that, look, it's probably a bunch of just Bible geeks that, I'm going to get the Bible thrown at me all week. All weekend, I'm going to, be with a bunch of guys that probably don't think and act like me. And man, it was anything but that. And seeing Rooster, who's the baddest, known to be the baddest man in Monroe, and I figured out real quick, he doesn't just portray, he's not just a Jesus guy. He absolutely loves Jesus. And he portrays Jesus in everything he does. He's one of the most loving, just awesome human beings I've ever met. And I was blessed to see him because it relaxed me. Like, all right, this is going to be different. So, man, and just I can't say enough about him. He's an extremely close friend of mine now, and part of our family. We do lunch and dinner once or twice a month, and anytime we have any get together, and my wife will even say it like, "Hey, did you call Rooster?" So that's how much he means to us.
When back, actually talking about when Paul showed up, and and they're all like, "Hey, whoa, wait a minute! Do you realize who this guy is?" But
that's right.
But that just goes to show that even in the book of Acts with Paul and his his life-changing event on the road, road to Damascus, and then here modern day, you see this basically the same thing, in a Rooster Hamby, and it could be you could put a dotted line and write anybody's name in there. People, I'm sure there's people back home that look at me and say, I ain't believing that about that guy. And you may have the same thing, but it's what we do. And I gotta be honest with you, Chris, I'm not one that's going to memorize scripture and verse for everything that I want. I know where it's at. I know what it says. And sometimes I'll have to Google it and pull it up in order to actually quote it to you. But at the same time, my thing is, I believe people this day and time hear more by what they see than what they hear, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And it's funny because, just kind of talking about that Rooster story and kind of the direction you just went is, I sat there when Frank moved here, we were talking about the preacher earlier that kind of started my transformation. I had this thought, you think about a rooster. I had this thought too of, man, I can't really start diving into a relationship with Jesus. You know, before I went on that retreat, I would have told you, like, man, I'm one guy, and people know Big Daddy. People know me on the golf course. People know me around, you know, when I was younger and acting a fool. People know me at ULM baseball and football tailgates. Like, I wasn't afraid to have a drink. I wasn't afraid to talk trash, potty mouth, you know, and I remember I went to have coffee with Frank, and prior to being baptized, like truly baptized, and I was sitting at coffee with Frank, and he asked me, he looks at me point blank, and he's like, "Where's your relationship with Jesus?" And, you know, it kind of threw me off, and I was thinking, well, you know, I go to church. I thought I was good. You know, I started doing a little bit of life group at that point. So I thought, man, I donate to the church. You know, I donate to the things the church has. And, you know, I wasn't really serving at that point, but, you know, if they needed help with something, I would help them. And I thought, hey, like, I'm checking the box for all these things that are good. So I'm probably pretty good. Like I should be checking my way to heaven. And, man, when Frank looked at me and said that, it threw me off. And he was like, well, "What do you think about being baptized?" And I said, well, Frank, I can't get baptized, especially not public. You know, I can't make a public proclamation because, man, what are people going to think? Like, I got these guys that know me, like, you know, if I say a cuss word on the golf course, or if I have a beer at a tailgate, like, what are they going to think? You know, am I going to be judged because I'm trying to be a Christian, but I'm not perfect? And Frank looked over at me, and I'll never forget it. I'll never forget his face. I wish I could have had a picture of my face when he said it. And it's very simple, but man, when you think about it, it's pretty, it was life-changing for me. He just said, well, Big Dad, who told you you had to be perfect? And it was shocking. Like, great point. He said, there's only one perfect person that's ever walked the face of the earth, and he died on the cross for us. So, you know, you're not called to be perfect. You're called to be changed. You're called to be different. And that's man, right. It hit me to my core the way he said that. And I was baptized, I think, 2 weeks later. And really, I was baptized in water then. And I would say that I 100% knew at that point why I was being baptized. I was starting a relationship with Christ, and I was making that proclamation public, but I still didn't live in the Word. I still didn't live from that point forward. There was definitely a change. There was definitely some things that were changing in my life. But man, until I went on that men's retreat, it was probably about a year and a half later. That's when, man, that true process of, okay, it's time to lean into this relationship with Jesus, and that it's way more important than just baptism, going to church, and serving. Like, it's all about having a true relationship with Jesus, and that's what gets you to heaven and be with the Father in an everlasting life.
That's like, you know, best way I've ever heard it put was, redemption is immediate, because that comes through the blood of Jesus Christ. But our sanctification, Larry Bowles pretty much said it the right way on the Unashamed podcast we talked about when I had him on. He said, a lot of people think that you get converted once and it's over.
That's right.
He said our conversion has happened every day. It's basically another word for the sanctification process. I mean, and I've always, you know, heard people say, well, what's going to happen with my cigarettes, or what's going to happen with my alcohol, or what's going to happen with this or that. And I said, look, you got to get Jesus on the inside first. You get him on the inside, you truly get him on the inside, he'll work with you through those things and help you get rid of them. But that cigarette's not going to take you to hell. Not having a relationship with Jesus Christ is what's going to take you to hell. So that's great. So as you're walking through and you're realizing this, who came into your life through that time to kind of help, you know, mentor you, disciple you through that process?
Man, that's a great question. And I wouldn't say there was a person. I would say there was a group of folks.
You do live in Revival City, baby.
That's right. I would do a bunch of people a disservice by trying to name, and I will name some definitely, because there's some guys that have meant some serious things in my life. some guys you've already got podcasts with, but and I'll probably miss some, but man, the guys I met on that men's retreat absolutely changed my life. You got Jeff Fitzgerald, who you've done a podcast with. You've got Corey Taylor, who you've done a podcast with. Jeff McPherson, who has became one of my close friends. Brent Acord, who I'll tell you more about, kind of what he's done for me. And sitting there, he was the first testimony I saw at a men's retreat. And he's the one that probably during his talk spoke to me the absolute most. But man, there's so many. I mean, and I don't know who all. I haven't watched every podcast. I've watched a bunch of them, but the Greg Manleys of the world, the Johnny Phillips of the world, the Bill Swanders and Jody Mosses, and Chad Frankwitz lives across the street from me and had been praying for me to go on a men's retreat for a long time. We used to work.
Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit too. You talked about that on Hallie's podcast about how your neighbor was your influence in going to their men's retreat. Absolutely.
He, man, so we worked together at Waterfront. So we had already been friends through college. Chad's an unbelievably great guy, and he's definitely a talker. Love him to death, but he had been praying for me to go on a men's retreat since his change. And I'd heard about men's retreats up to this point. I'd heard a lot about them. I had a lot of friends that either went on them or served on them. But it kind of sounded like a cult to me, because, you can't talk about it. You can't tell anybody what happens. You can't have your watch. You can't have your phone. And I'm like, man, that's a lot of can'ts, And so Chad goes on his retreat, and I think his wife had went on a retreat as well by that point. So anyway, they lived across the street. And so we would do a lot of holidays together, in our neighborhood. We do fireworks for New Year's Eve. We do fireworks for July 4th. And I don't remember. Chad knows exactly which one it was. And I don't, but, and he gave it, he opened for me to give my testimony. But anyway, he came to our house, for, I want to say it had to be July 4th, for the fireworks. And typically Chad and I would, I would definitely would never say we were drunkards. We'd have a drink, we have a beer, maybe have a glass of wine or something. Hope he doesn't mind me saying that. And, but he would come over, and the night he comes over, it's probably a week or two after his retreat, and I offer to have a beer with him, and he's like, "Man, I'm not drinking anymore." And I was like, I kind of remember now, because he said I got really aggravated, but I was like, "Man, here's the effing problem with these men's retreats. Like, you go over there and you get changed, and you can't even be the same person anymore. Like, I can't even have a beer with you." And I didn't remember saying it that way, but he said that's exactly how I said it. But it was this thing like, great, now you got to be different, And so, but yeah, you're called to be different. You don't, you're not called to be perfect, but you are called to live differently. And whatever your convictions are, and his conviction was drinking. And so now I look back and I'm like, man, I can't believe I disrespected that. I fully respect it now.
Right.
So, but it was one of those things. I was like, great, these stupid men's retreats, like I don't even have my friends anymore. So, but I would like to tell you about, man, Brent Acord, and it kind of tells you about the change in me and my son, and just, there's a lot of stuff that goes
absolutely, brother. You go.
I don't think Brent would mind. He's actually said, he doesn't mind telling part of his story, but one part of his story that, like, when he opened up, early on in his story, he talked about his dad being his hero. And I remember writing on my book, would Gavin say I was his hero? And my answer was no. Man, I was a golfer. And so that's all I did. I played golf. I played golf every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Sometimes when I got off work on Wednesday. And so I told you about my son and his diagnosis. And so when it hit me the most, he kind of went on and he said that he didn't believe he was the same hero for his son. And man, I just remember circling that and being like, man, I just don't think. In fact, I know Gavin wouldn't say I was his hero then. I hope he would say it now, and I feel confident he would probably say it now. But he talked about baseball being his idol. He's a baseball coach, and I wrote down my idol was golf. And I think my son would tell you, I don't think he would tell you that I idolized Jesus I definitely know he wouldn't have told you that. He would have told you that I idolize Goff 100%, and that my hero is Goff. I told you as we walked through those diagnoses and we walked through those treatments. So Gavin, I told you had 12 treatments, right? So the question would be, how many of those treatments do you think I made, John? They were every Friday.
I know the answer. I've listened to the podcast. You go ahead and tell them, brother.
0. I didn't make any. Because I was too busy playing golf. So that changed me from that point forward. Gosh darn it. I said I wasn't going to cry. It happens every time. It doesn't matter how many times I tell that part of the story. But, yeah, that whole testimony changed me, just sitting there thinking that, when my son said I was his hero and I didn't make a single one of his appointments because I was too busy with golf. So too busy with me, not just golf, but, my wife, she had to, whatever we did came after golf. Saturday, if we're going to hang out, I'm going to play golf in the morning. We can meet later. Sunday, I rarely went to lunch. If we did go to church at that time, I'd rarely go to lunch. Even in some of those times between getting baptized and starting an actual walk with Jesus, I wouldn't go to lunch. Like, man, we'd get done with church and I'm out of there. I'm going to the golf course. Like, y'all enjoy lunch as a family. I'll be on the golf course. And man, it changed when I heard that. Like, I have people ask me all the time because they knew how much I played. I mean, I rarely play. I've probably played 12 rounds this whole year, where used to, if I didn't play 12 rounds in a month, like I would feel guilty for missing my golf games. You know what I'm saying? Like I mean, it was my idol 100%. So listening to Brent Acord, the very first testimony, I mean, I broke. Just hearing him talk about that, I mean, it changed me. And I still got it in my notes. Like, I wrote it down and said, we will be friends. Brent and I wrote that down. We will be friends. And I can say, man, he is, again, like a rooster. He is one of my closest dudes. We talk or text almost. We're in multiple text groups together, but individually we talk or text nearly daily. And he's been somebody that I lean on through my walk. Just such a positive influence to know that, he idolized. He was a baseball coach for a long time. He's back coaching now, but he was a baseball coach and he idolized coaching. Like, that was his identity. And, as I've walked through, my identity was golfer. Like, I think Gavin would have told you golfer, work, family, then Jesus, and even on my, you talk about social media, even on my social media, it would always say, like, it started out, I'm a golfer, I'm a fan, I'm a dad, I'm a grocery salesman, and then it would say something about Jesus. Well, now you log in and see it, and it starts with Jesus. But that first testimony started my change 100%. And I said I would never idolize anything else but Jesus, and my family would see it.
That's amazing, because Brent came to me at the reunion. I'd always seen him online, in the mornings for the Buckman Bible study, but I really didn't know who he was. I was trying to, do I know that guy from somewhere? So whenever I went in that morning, because I actually went and was actually in person the week of the retreat, and it's amazing how much different it is to actually be there with those guys. But I still appreciate being with them through Zoom. But at the retreat, Brent came up to him. I forget what we were talking about. But I think he found out I was from West Virginia, and he had coached up in there somewhere or did something up through that area.
Yeah.
But I think if I don't have it, I'm going to have you to forward me his contact number, because I want to talk to him about coming on.
Absolutely. He would be somebody
I'd love to have him.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
He would be somebody I highly suggest you getting on. Brent's awesome. And he's got an awesome change. He's got an awesome story, and we had walked through a lot of the same things, just, in our families and our identities were not in Christ. And he's somebody that I would say his identity is 100% in Christ. And, I don't want to tell his story, but the things that have happened in his family with his turn are just unbelievable to watch, and that's what, like, he's the type of guy, the Roosters, the Jeff Fitzgeralds, those are the guys that you see what's happening in their lives. And it's like, man, I want to be a part of that. I want that for my family. So just great dudes, man. And what I figured out on that men's retreat was it wasn't a bunch of Bible thumping geeks. It was a bunch of men's. Now, you can be a man, a real man, and you figured out real quick it's cool to cry.
Yeah,
it's cool to love Jesus. It's cool to lead your family through Christ. And if you want to call any one of them dudes a Bible thumping geek, I think they would probably be cool with it.
Oh,
no
yeah.
matter how big and bowed up, or what they've done in the past, or what history they have in sports or whatever. If you call them a Bible thumping geek, I think they'd smile at you.
They sure would.
So
yeah. So whenever you went to the retreat, was it after the retreat that you pretty much laid down your clubs and started turning things back around, or was it later?
No, it was almost immediate. I mean, I had left that retreat. And I mean, just to kind of give you the history. So I saw that first testimony. We played some music, and during that next song, and I would tell you the name of it. I was just looking at it. I'll tell you the name of it in just a second. But the song broke me. So I was in the middle of the song. I was shaking. I was crying, like not figuring out what in the world is happening. I don't want to dive into the things that happened at the retreat, but I was sitting there like, man, something ain't right. And what I know now is the Holy Spirit was telling me it's time. It's time to not just be a checkmark Christian. It's time to use this megaphone that everybody says I have, and this loud voice that bounces off walls to love Jesus. And man, it was early that morning, maybe mid-morning the first day. And I grabbed up a friend of mine, Jody Moss, and who had actually been one of the main ones pushing me to go. And from that point, I surrendered my life to Christ. So there was a difference between, starting my walk and being baptized to the point, for a year to year and a half, I did that. But man, my full surrender came at that men's retreat, where it was like, my life is going to be different. And I'm going to assure that not just my life is different, but I'm going to assure that my family's life is going to be different. And by assure, it was, originally I thought when I came off that retreat, it was throwing the Bible at them. Like, I'm going to throw scripture at them. I'm going to do this. But what I realized is I'm just going to pray with them. I pray with my son every single night of the week. I pray with my wife every single night of the week, rarely ever missing a night. And I would tell you, prior to that retreat, I don't know that I ever prayed with my son or my wife unless we were at a Thanksgiving dinner. And then I didn't even feel comfortable. I think a lot of my buddies would tell you, we had this little Wednesday night, we call it Big Beer Wednesday, but it was a bunch of the football coaches where we would cook and eat and have a beer to talk about the Friday night game after they were done with their biggest practices. And, they would ask me to pray every now and again. And I was like, hey, look, I can't pray tonight, but next Wednesday I'll be ready, because that's how I was. I just wasn't, I wasn't the biggest public speaker. Like, I'm a talker. I love people, but I didn't like talking in public, and I didn't feel comfortable praying in public. And so it was kind of weird for me to look back now, and man, I'll stop and pray for anybody at any point. I love it. But that was probably the start of my change, was when I said, look, we're about to, I want to make sure that my family and I spend eternity in heaven together. And I realized then that it wasn't because we were going to get our green check mark for an hour and a half at church, that we were going to lean in and have relationships with Jesus. And so I would say that's what, when I left that retreat, it just had to be different. I mean, it's like I said, you don't have to be perfect, and I still play golf, but it's not my identity anymore. My identity is in Christ and spending time with my family.
So I noticed, how long ago was it? Was Aaron was baptized? So I guess my question was, when you first come back, was she like, well, let's see how long this will last? Or, You know, I mean, what was she, when you all talk about it now, what was her, because I'm sure you all have had conversations, you know, now that things have changed in your life, I mean, dramatically, relationship wise, you know, when you put Christ you know, in the center of it. How long did it really take her to say, man, he has really changed? This is going to stick.
Well, I wish, I don't know that she's ever really thought or said that. I'm sure she thought it coming off that, man, this will wear off, you know. But I think she saw that, hey, I wasn't going to, like, this is the new me. I've tried to quit cussing. I rarely, which I wasn't a big drinker at that point, but, you know, I rarely drink anymore. It's just that, and it's just my personal convictions. Like, you know, I don't want to do anything that's going to have anybody else step off their faith journey. So I think she saw that change and saw that, you know, I started serving in every capacity I could serve. I probably said yes way too many of these retreats, not just because it takes away family time, but I think she saw that I was going to dive in. And through that, she started diving in. She started doing some Bible studies with our neighbor, which is Chad's wife, Kelly. She's a very strong Christian woman too. And she started doing some Bible studies with her. And we started going to life group in church way more regularly. I mean, when I say regularly, every Sunday, like we rarely miss unless we're just sick or out of town. So as we started diving in, and she started doing some studying on her own, you know, I'd come home and she was reading her Bible. She'd be doing a Bible study that Kelly and her were doing. And man, through that, she had her own change where she started having these, and it's really unbelievable when you think about it, but she started having these visions in her dreams, kept her up at night several times. And it was the dream was very, very scriptural. It was like, it was pointing her to one certain scripture. And I wish she can probably hear me. So I wish she'd come in here and tell me exactly which one it was. I've got her a painting made now. Psalms 41-3. She's standing at the door. I told you she'd been listening. Maybe you can walk in and say hello.
Yeah, she'd come in. Absolutely.
So Psalms 41-3, and she had these dreams about it. And then she told me, and I blew it off. I feel terrible now, but I know why I blew it off. Like I guess it was the next morning, or maybe a few days later, she told me about this dream, and I was like, nah, you know, kind of just blew it off. Didn't think it was anything. Like, okay, I'm glad you had that dream. You know, it's pretty cool. We go to life group and we get to talking about Psalms 140. And so it was kind of weird. And you talk about JJ's wife. JJ's wife is the one that starts talking about kind of these thoughts that she's had. And as she's having these thoughts, I look at my wife. It's the same thoughts my wife had, was like, you know, and questioning herself, questioning her faith, questioning had Jesus ever spoke to her, you know, and like she sees me serving and sees me doing these retreats and sees me having these things where I feel like Jesus is leading me in directions, and she's kind of questioning herself. And JJ's wife is saying the same thing. And I kind of look over and I just see her crying. And I knew then, I was like, man, this is crazy. And so Matt Dickerson, and I didn't name Matt earlier, which is, man, he is an unbelievably powerful speaker. If you haven't had Matt on, John, I would suggest getting Matt on as soon as you can. He's one of the strongest speakers, man, and he just knows the word so well. And he stopped us during life group. He's like, Chris, have you ever read Psalms 140? And I was thinking, no, not really. I mean, I kind of blew it off, you know. And so he looks up Psalms 140. And if you don't mind, I'm gonna look it up real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, Psalms 40. I'm sorry. So he's like, have you ever stopped and read Psalms 40? And I said, well, no. So the name of Psalms 40 is Thanksgiving and a Cry for Help. And it says, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he turned to me and heard my cry for help. He brought me up from a desolate pit, out of the muddy clay, and set my feet on a rock, making my steps secure. He put a new song in my mouth and a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and fear, and they will trust in the Lord. And so when you hear that, it was like, ding, 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 baby, you're questioning, are you having the same type salvation experience I'm having? And is God speaking to you? The name of the psalm is A Cry for Help. And it's, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he turned to me and heard my cry for help. Was like, hello, he's speaking to you right now. And you're like, we all missed it. You called it. You told me. And I kind of looked past it like, yeah, okay. I feel terrible now, but hearing Matt say it, we both just started crying. And I was like, wow. I mean, I apologized to her. Like, maybe I'm sorry I didn't stop and listen, but she was baptized, I think, the next week. So, and it was one of those, she had been baptized when she was younger, just like I was, but it was a baptism where you were just dunked in water and you didn't have any change in your life,
Right.
There was no sanctification process. You just, you had water poured over you, or you were dunked and probably felt like you were good, but realized, hey, there wasn't a full surrender and giving your life to the Lord. And Greg Manley talks about it all the time. And it's one thing that I love when he says is the lordship part of when you give your life to Christ, like he's the Lord of your life. Well, we had both given our life to Christ and been baptized, but we didn't have he wasn't the Lord of our life. We were just been baptized in water. And so, at that point, she had a full surrender moment and was baptized the next week. That's what you saw online.
And I thought that was awesome. When I saw that, man, I was just like, I was cheering.
Oh,
Nobody could see me. I was cheering, man. That's awesome. But, yeah, you're right, man. I mean, Greg and I know of Greg because he was there at the retreat.
That's right.
I don't know him as well as like I know you or Corey, Matt Dickerson. I reached out to him, and he doesn't know me, man. I reached out to him on social media and never did hear anything back. But there again, they really don't know. These guys don't know nothing about me. And half of them probably don't spend any time on social media. But I will tell you a quick story about social media with me.
Yeah.
So I had an incident. I got off of social media. I had an incident. We can talk about it later. So I got off social media and wasn't on Facebook or anything, Instagram, anything for probably 5 years, 6 years. So when I started the podcast, I reopened the account, or I started a new account, because I didn't want to be tied to any of that old crap.
Right.
And it's all zero political. It's all about inspiration. It's all about Christ. I did it to promote the podcast, that sort of thing. I don't do anything else, man. And I got, you can see people's posts that nobody else can see from some of your friends. So I see some stuff and I'm like, man, do I want to be friends with that person? And then I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I need to be friends with that person because they're the ones that need to hear my message.
That's right.
So if I unfriend them, they're never going to hear that message. And it was an eye opener for me. I don't participate or comment on anything. I stay and I just keep going. That's punching somebody's arm,
Yeah.
You just keep punching. And after a while, they're going to say, man, that's starting to hurt. But
right.
But you have, so real quick now that
go ahead.
When I left there, man, I didn't have nobody. And that's why I hung on to JJ so tight. The rest of you guys. So when I finally came back and I went to church there and came to the awakening class, and I asked JJ, I said, man, do you all do this online? He said, yeah, normally. And that's how I actually started zooming in there. And then lo and behold, I got hooked up with, I forget, Grant. I reached out to Grant about the Buck Commander Bible study because I can do that and then go into work, because you guys are, an hour behind me. So I just listened to it on my way into work. But what you all have there, man, is so incredible. And guys like me that don't have that right now, and it's coming. It's coming. I finally met with the pastor here where I go to church, and I met with him last week, and we spoke briefly this morning. But I don't want something forced or superficial. I want it to be 100% genuine, because I want to know, there's no doubt in my mind, I could come to a Big Daddy and I could call you up and say, Chris, man, I need to talk to you about something. And no, when we hung up the phone, that's as far as it goes.
Absolutely.
It's not that you're out there to tell secrets to somebody or anything, but man, sometimes you just need somebody to reach out to. I do that with JR. I mean, I met JR whenever I came up there for the WFR retreat reunion and went to church with you all. And then JJ went down when Corey and Fitz baptized those guys in the Ouachita there at the park when it was flooding.
Yep.
And that's where I met. I sat there beside JR in awakening class. And then whenever we went down there, we got to talking. He said, man, he said, you call me anytime. He said, I'm telling you, you just call. Ever since then. And then when I came up to the retreat, I stayed in his cabin.
Yeah.
Instead of staying out at the camp. So for you all to have what you have, man, I get it. I understand. And it's coming. Todd Langdon and I are, man, we text every day now. He wanted me to tell you he loved you. He just texted me on the phone. I sent him a picture of the screen. So guess who I'm talking to?
Yeah.
But so where are you now? And how do you look? Okay, let me back up. So when you go to the retreat without telling anything about it,
Mm-hmm.
when you're attending, no watch, no phone, you don't know what time it is, you don't know what's happening next, and your emotions are kind of running all over the place. It's a roller coaster ride. But when you go back and team, and I'd always heard everybody say, man, you got to go team. It's totally different. You'll probably get more out of it by teaming than you did when you actually attended. I got to say, bro, teaming is where it's at.
That's right.
Because I don't do real well in receiving. I'm not one of those to let somebody serve me. That's just not, that was hard for me.
Right.
But to be able to go there and give and do and be able to allow somebody else to have that experience. So for you to go back and do those, because you've done several, do you ever feel that it's losing its luster or its power, or do you feel like it's getting stronger as it goes?
That's a great question. I want to go back real quick because you were talking about what you didn't have. And there was a word that I want to bring up that I think is as important as any word you can talk about and what these retreats mean. And it's kind of what you were referring to that you don't have right now, and that's community.
Yeah, that's it. That's good.
What these retreats have done for not just me, but in my opinion, so many other people, is it's giving you community. And what that community does is in that community, you find out you have a John G, you have these relationships to where, going into that, you're a military guy. Like you're told you're not supposed to have feelings. You're a man, you're in the military. And I've never been in the military, but I'm assuming just through conversations, like men don't have feelings. Men don't cry. Men are just supposed to figure out how to get it done, figure out how to get through it. But at the end of the end of the day, we do have feelings, and we do have emotions. And what you find in that community of believers is it's okay to not have a good day. It's okay to not be perfect every single day of the week. It's okay to have, I'm not going to say it's okay to have arguments with your wife, but it's okay to have arguments with your wife and have somebody to call and say, man, listen, I was just a low down, dirty scoundrel today and need to talk to somebody about it. Previous to me going on the retreat, like I wouldn't talk to folks about stuff going on in my life, and still I'm a little reluctant, but overall, like, man, I'm an open book, and I try to be that way for so many other people as well. And you were talking about, before we got into that, you were talking about, social media and the changes your social media. And I mean, I think if you looked over the last 2.5 years in mine versus where it was before, I'm feeding you Jesus on purpose. Like, one, if I showed you the number of messages, and it's not about me, and let that be known, But if I showed you the number of messages and texts and stuff that I've received over the last 2.5 years from somebody just randomly saying, man, I appreciate you posting that Bible verse today. I appreciate you posting those lyrics. It made me go listen to the song. Man, I was going through so-and-so today and just seeing that lyric, whatever the lyrics or whatever you posted there, or the podcast or the Joby Martin video. Like, I went back and listened to it, and I'm sitting there going, man, I didn't even know people pay attention to that stuff. But what you realize is many people pay attention to your Facebooks and your social medias that you don't know. And if that's the little bit of Jesus they get, then I'm going to keep feeding it, But I just wanted to bring that up because you were talking about it without saying that word of what those retreats do in its community.
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
And I would say, man, so to answer the last question, no, I don't think it's slowing down at all. I think if anything, it's definitely putting fire on it. There's a definite fire in Northeast Louisiana, and now it's starting to go, further and further with these retreats that are turning men's lives to Jesus. And what that does is it's turning the family to Jesus too. I can't explain it, but you can definitely, this season has been a little more difficult for me. I'm only 2.5 years in. A lot of these guys that we mentioned earlier have been doing it for 6 and 8 years. And they've gotten to where they only do 1 or 2 a season. Well, this season I said yes to, in November, I'll do my 5th. 2 teen retreats, 2 men's retreats. I did a thing called the lip sync battle. And so
congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. That's that trophy you see in the background back there. So
that thing's huge.
But what that does for me is when you're diving in a little, you can almost get to where your busyness becomes, that's how the devil attacks you. So for me personally, I can't speak to everybody, but when you're overdoing it, it takes away from your family time. And in that busyness, you can't really dive in. Like even the Whites Ferry Road retreat this season, I didn't feel like I dove in to some relationships like I have in the past because I was so busy. I wasn't there the full time like I typically am. I had to be in and out some. And I think that's for me, that's where the devil attacks me the most is in my busyness. So personally, I could say, man, when you are doing too many things and too many platforms in that busyness, it can seem like it dies down a little bit because you're not getting as fed as you are and you're not feeding people around you as much as you would feel like you would like to. But in the grand scheme of things, I don't see it slowing down at all. I see it. You think about, Whites Ferry Road, just think about the Whites Ferry Road women's retreat. I mean, they signed up. They had a full deal of 45 people in 7 minutes. The Whites Ferry Road men's retreat, it took about a week. But, North Monroe men, we had 44, and I want to say it was a little over 30 minutes. So it's tough to say that anything's slowing down when these things fill up in less than a week, and for the most part, most of them fill up in less than a day. So I just don't see it slowing down at all. And I continue to see, more and more men turn their life to Christ. And there's a stat out there that says, when the man turns his life to Christ, 97% of the family will follow. And so, I think if we can keep touching those men's and not just the men, but the wives and these women's retreats, it sparks a fire that I've never been a part of before in anything, but it definitely sparks that flame. It's an emotional high. And then how you proceed with that's really on you. And if, like me and you, we get tied into the Bible studies, we get tied into the life groups. And, as you start walking out that life, people see it. People see that change. Like I tell people all the time, I answer the exact same way when you ask how I'm doing. I'm blessed. And I am. Like I've got no other, I'm far more blessed beyond means than I deserve. And that's just what you're going to see. You're going to see I'm going to live out being blessed every day.
Absolutely. Yeah. Whenever I see a Corey Taylor or JJ, I mean, Corey, I don't know how many Bible studies and stuff that he zooms in. I mean, he's the one that sets that up. He's there. He's allows other people that can't be there to participate. And to me, that's, man, you can't put a price on that. That's just incredible. So we had, now Todd and I teamed, but counting Todd and I and Ron Hunley who teamed, there was 6 of us from Florida there. Anywhere from Pensacola to the Tampa area, Sarasota area, all the way down to Lake Okeechobee. I know that there was one guy there from Canada.
That's right.
Arkansas, Texas. So Grant's dad was there teaming, and he's from Texas. Yeah. So, I mean, so your pastor, we recorded once. I was telling you about this, and we're redoing it tomorrow. Whenever this goes up, people don't pay attention to that. Pastor Bill's part of a pastoral series that I'm doing. But I was talking to him about how it feels like there's a revival. There is. It's not, it feels like, but there is a revival there in Monroe and West Monroe, North Louisiana, just like you said, that it's not in one church building. I mean, it's like the denominational barriers are gone, that it's about Jesus Christ. It's not, who was it? Was it Larry Bowles said, Jesus plus something equals nothing?
That's right.
Jesus plus nothing equals everything. And with that concept and what you guys are doing there, because it takes all these different denominations. That's like when Whites Ferry Road did their first one. It took churches from all around, Christ Church, North Monroe. I don't know who else was part of that. Absolutely. To help them get that started. Now Whites Ferry Road they've got plenty of guys. I mean, it was great how many were there serving. Now they can go out and help others. But what I was telling Pastor Bill is, what's happening there is not like the Brownsville revival. I don't know if you're familiar with the Brownsville, Texas. There was a revival down there at the church, and everybody would drive thousands of miles to go to. To me, it's different than the Asbury revival that's on the campus, because this revival that's happening where you guys are at, it's happening right here, brother. It's right. A heart change. And we are the church. And if revival starts here, it's not going to stay in Monroe. It's coming to Florida. It's going to Canada. It's going to Texas. It's going to North Carolina. It's going to Arkansas. It's going to Nebraska. And it's not about one church building that's experiencing this, because what people don't know is it's just not the men's ministry. It's not just the women's ministry or women's retreats. But you've got male teen retreats, female teen retreats that all these churches are putting on. And it's amazing to watch on Sunday morning, the ones that didn't get baptized at camp are getting baptized at the churches.
That's right.
So it's not just a man thing. Don't think it's because Chris and I are sitting here talking about our experience at the retreat. Chris's wife experienced it. JJ's wife experienced it. Todd Langdon's wife went and experienced it. It's the real deal, man. And people's lives are being changed. God's using these retreats to change lives.
Yeah, and look, the bottom line is, and I get caught up in this a lot, and I feel like I don't know why, because I probably shouldn't, but I feel like this judgment, because, man, at the end of the day, I think we all understand, and sometimes I think people look, because I post on social media so much, like, it's not about any of us. It ain't about it. It isn't about the retreat. It isn't about me or John or any of them people, that any of these guys that we mentioned earlier. It's all about Jesus. What the retreat does is it's a catalyst to get you to understand that Jesus is more important than anything else in your life. But that catalyst, through men and through their obedience and through their walks, show other men and other women and other teens, like, hey, your identity doesn't have to be in this sport and your job or in anything else. Your identity can be in Christ, and you can still be an awesome human being. You can still be a great coach. You can still be a great sales manager. You can still be a great energy person. You can still be a great whatever you are, but have a true relationship with Jesus through that. But as you're talking about that, we're getting ready to do a retreat with a church called Family Church over in West Monroe. It's the first one they've ever done. And our first meeting, I guess it was 3 or 4 weeks ago, no, maybe a month and a half ago now, but we all wore name tags from different churches because they've never had a retreat. So they only have, I think it's 6 guys on our team that have ever been on a retreat that are from their church. We had 13 churches represented at that first meeting.
There you go.
And all of them, I mean, that's probably 13 different churches. And I would say it's probably 9 different denominations. So it's from every walk of life, but we come together just like guys that team on the North Row retreat that don't go to church there, just like me teaming on Whites Ferry Road. You know, I teamed on the first one because it's kind of like this. We were helping the guys that have been on retreats at Whites Ferry Road get started. But I've teamed everyone since because I fell in love with some of those guys, like, you know, the Grant Taylors, the Colin Dunns, the Brian Ruckers, the Derek McQueens. Like, man, those guys are like family to me now. And I go team their retreat because I love how they show Jesus to the CR world. I love how they show Jesus to the men of their church. And you just want to be a part. You just want to be around those guys. And so that's exactly right. Like, denominations don't matter as long as we're all leaning in to figure out it's about Jesus. It ain't about any of us. You know, sometimes I feel like I have to tell people that, but I shouldn't. I mean, if you don't think it's about Jesus, then you got to look at yourself. But it's all about Jesus and you know, discovering that what Jesus means to us and our families and our lives. Like, you know, if you're going to put something on a pedestal, put Jesus on the pedestal, and here's why, and here's how to live that out, you know? So, but to see that, like, I was touched that night when you realize there was 13 different churches there to start a retreat at a church that, and they're a little bit different denomination than definitely what I'm accustomed to, but guess what? They love Jesus. So I'm in.
I hear that. I tell you what, there's not going to be much of a better place for us to end this thing, man. I don't know what in the world, anything could be said better than what you just said. We'd have started with that. We'd have probably only been here about 10 minutes.
There you go.
But look, brother, I hope this ain't the last time I see you on here. I'd kind of like to work out a thing where we get a couple guys on here, 2 or 3 of you at the same time, as I get through this and learn this program and how all this works. I hate not being present with everybody, but hey, I'm not going to stop just because I can't be there, because there's too much to be told, too many stories to be told. And tell Erin, anytime you're on here, she wants to jump in there and say something. Hey,
she's
look,
probably still standing by the door, so I figured eventually she would at least come in here and show her face, but I don't know if she's going to. Or my son, I know he's standing he's in his room next door. I can hear him too. I figured they would at least pop in and at least say hi. But
hey, look, man, I do appreciate it. Before we just hang around, like I said, hang around here after I close this out. But real quick, before we go, Chris, thanks again so much, brother. I do appreciate it. And I treasure our friendship. And I'm so blessed to be your friend and to be your brother and have the same friends in common that we've got. I mean, it's just, it means a lot to me. Before we get out of here, guys, forerunnerproductions.locals.com, forerunnerproductions.com, Forerunner Productions on all your podcast platforms. Now, for right now, if you want to get audio only, go over to the YouTube link. We're working through some things in the podcast world where Chad's in Houston, Texas now, and I'm still here in Florida. So anyway, that's forerunnerproductions.locals.com, forerunnerproductions.com, Forerunner Productions on all your podcast platforms. And hey, we thank you, and we will see you in the next one.
Thanks, John G.